In the unforgiving world of medieval warfare, survival wasn't about honor, it was about using whatever weapon could end a fight the fastest and most brutally. Forget the chivalric duels and romantic tales of knights in shining armor. The reality was far more violent, more strategic, and often horrifyingly personal. When armor grew thicker and battles turned into grinding contests of endurance and attrition, weapons had to evolve beyond elegance. Some weren't made just to kill, they were built to crush, to maim, to break the body in ways no healer could fix. These weren't tools of war. They were statements of intent. In this deep dive into medieval brutality, we explore 3 of the most merciless weapons ever used on the battlefield, each one forged not just to defeat the enemy, but to erase their ability to fight back entirely. Number 1. The boar spear. In the brutal world of medieval warfare, where most weapons were designed either to pierce, slash, or crush, the boar spear stood out not because of elegance or prestige, but because of its cold practicality and sheer efficiency in delivering controlled, lethal force. This weapon, often overshadowed by swords and axes in popular imagination, was a specialist's tool, crafted for one purpose: stopping a charge and ending it decisively. What made it particularly merciless was not just its killing ability, but the psychological intent behind its construction. Its origins lie in hunting, specifically the dangerous pursuit of wild boars, animals known for charging even after taking mortal wounds. To stop such a beast, hunters needed a weapon that could puncture deep, lock in place, and hold against incredible force without endangering the wielder. When adapted for human combat, particularly in the later Middle Ages, the boar spear retained its defining feature, the crossguard, often in the form of lateral lugs or wings situated just behind the blade. These were not decorative. They served a critical function. Once the point penetrated armor or flesh, the wings would catch against the body, preventing overpenetration and reducing the chance that the attacker would lose control of the weapon. That was key in close combat, where the risk of being disarmed or swarmed was high. Against cavalry, this feature was even more vital. A well-positioned infantryman could brace the spear, aim directly at the oncoming horseman, and let the animal's momentum do the work. The crossguard would halt the rider's body, causing both sudden trauma and likely dismounting them violently. No elegance, no romanticized duel, just a brutal, efficient stop. The length of the weapon, usually between 6 and 8 feet, gave it the reach necessary for defensive lines, particularly when defending choke points like narrow gates, wooden palisades, or even castle corridors. In many cases, rows of soldiers would use these spears like a spiked wall. In fact, historical accounts from castle sieges and urban street battles describe infantry units with such spears forming secondary lines behind shield walls, targeting advancing enemies after the first crash of contact. And unlike lighter pikes, the boar spear's thick shaft and reinforced head made it less likely to snap under pressure, especially during prolonged melee engagements. What also made this weapon terrifying in actual use was how personal it could become. A sword could kill from several feet away. A bow kept you at even greater distance. But the boar spear required commitment. You had to hold your ground, align the point, and make the hit count. If you missed or didn't thrust deeply enough, you were likely dead. That reality shaped the kind of people who used this weapon. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't graceful, but it demanded nerve, discipline, and cold focus under pressure. This was not a weapon for show. It wasn't part of knightly ceremony or noble display. It was practical and almost brutally anti-heroic. Soldiers didn't write poems about it, but they trusted it when their lives depended on one clean, punishing thrust. Number 2, the Lucerne hammer. Among the many weapons forged during the brutal arms race of the late medieval period, the Lucerne hammer stands out not just for its deadly function but for the mindset it represents. This was not a weapon built for flourish or for duels in open fields. It was engineered to destroy plate armor, break apart the confidence of elite knights, and redefine what brutality looked like on a battlefield increasingly dominated by steel and structure. Originating in the Swiss cantons during the 15th century, the Lucerne hammer was a direct response to the evolution of armor. As metallurgy advanced and full-plate harnesses became more widespread among mounted nobles and professional men-at-arms, traditional slashing weapons began to lose their effectiveness. A sword edge, no matter how sharp, would simply glance off a properly forged breastplate or helmet. A weapon was needed that didn't rely on slicing or piercing in the traditional sense. It needed to crush, to puncture with precision, and to be wielded with absolute force. Structurally, the Lucerne hammer is a polearm, typically ranging from 5 to 7 feet in length, giving it excellent reach on foot and from elevated positions, such as behind a wall or formation. Its head is what makes it uniquely effective. On one side, it features a multi-pronged hammer face, usually 4 blunt flanges capable of caving in metal surfaces, denting helmets, or shattering limb armor. On the opposite side, there's a beak-like spike, often slightly curved downward, which wasn't meant to slice but to penetrate. Aiming this spike into vulnerable joints like armpits, neck gaps, or behind the knee was a common technique, and once it connected, it didn't just wound, it compromised the entire structure of the opponent's armor and mobility. On top of the hammerhead, a spear point often extended vertically, which made overhead thrusts a real threat in close quarters. That meant 3 options on a single head: blunt trauma, armor-piercing penetration, and thrusting capability. What set the Lucerne hammer apart was not just the design, but the tactical context in which it thrived. This was a weapon for formation combat, for disciplined infantry, for professional soldiers who were drilled to coordinate movement and control spacing. It wasn't a random battlefield choice. It was standard issue in many late medieval Swiss and German foot armies. Against charging cavalry, it was deadly. A well-timed swing could knock a rider from their mount or cripple a warhorse with a single devastating hit to the neck or front legs. In siege warfare, it served another brutal function. Once an enemy soldier was exposed on a ladder or trying to breach a barricade, the Lucerne hammer could be brought down with enough force to break arms through shields, crush hands on weapon grips, or drive the beak through a helm's eye slit. It was about control, breaking down the opponent both physically and psychologically. Unlike swords or axes, which were sometimes symbols of social status or ritual, the Lucerne hammer had none of that cultural baggage. It was a weapon built by necessity, reflecting the increasingly technical nature of warfare. This was a battlefield equalizer. It didn't care about bloodlines, banners, or reputation. Whether wielded by a mercenary or a militia soldier, it served one purpose: to defeat armored opponents who once thought themselves invincible. In a time when armor was supposed to represent invulnerability, the Lucerne hammer was the cold, splintering answer. Number 3, the bec de corbin. In the grim reality of late medieval warfare, where heavily armored knights once dominated the field with seemingly impenetrable plate harnesses, the emergence of weapons like the bec de corbin represented a shift not just in military tactics, but in mindset. No longer was war solely about glory, code, or noble clashes. It became about precision violence, methodical dismantling of the opponent, and a deliberate focus on exploiting vulnerability. The bec de corbin, which translates from Old French as raven's beak, was a weapon that symbolized this new approach to war. Unlike broad swords or sweeping polearms, it wasn't meant to dazzle with flair or crowd control. It was built for close quarters brutality, and every inch of its design had a specific lethal purpose. Essentially a polearm with a length of 5 to 6 feet, the bec de corbin had 3 core attack components: a stout hammerhead for concussive strikes, a long downward curved spike resembling a raven's beak for puncturing armor, and a steel spike at the top designed for stabbing in tight angles or during thrusts. This trio of features allowed it to be versatile without sacrificing focus. The hammer could shatter bones under chain mail or dent a breastplate with such force that it disabled mobility, leaving an opponent stunned or exposed. But the true terror came from the beak. It wasn't sharp in the traditional slicing sense, but it was incredibly narrow and solid, intended to deliver all the energy of a swing into a tiny impact zone. Against armor, that meant localized destruction, puncturing gaps between plates, slipping into visor openings, crushing through mail under tension, and reaching soft tissue behind hardened defenses. Its design was influenced by earlier war hammers and poleaxes, but the bec de corbin focused less on broad utility and more on calculated lethality. It was particularly effective in formations or siege combat, where enemies wore full suits of armor and traditional weapons simply bounced off or slid aside. A trained soldier using this weapon didn't hack wildly. They targeted weak spots: joints, necklines, elbows, armpits, locations that even the best designed armor couldn't fully protect. And once a strike landed, it didn't just disable, it often killed instantly or caused enough trauma to render someone combat ineffective. Unlike axes or swords, which could get stuck in bone or armor, the bec de corbin was engineered to withdraw cleanly after every hit, allowing rapid, repeated use in crowded melees. Another element of its brutality came from how it was wielded. While most polearms were used with sweeping arcs or two handed overhand strikes, the bec de corbin allowed for hooking, jabbing, and even yanking techniques. A fighter could use the beak to hook a limb or collar, pulling the enemy off balance or dragging them to the ground, then immediately switch to the hammer side to deliver a crushing blow. This dual-function combat made it ideal not just for open field battle, but also for close combat during breaches, stairwell fights, and castle interiors. Any space where movement was limited but killing power was needed. It was a favorite among dismounted knights and elite infantry tasked with breaking through enemy lines or neutralizing other armored targets. Its presence signaled that the fight was not about honor, it was about ensuring that the person in front of you never got back up. What makes the corbin particularly significant in the broader context of medieval warfare is that it embodies the transition from romanticized notions of chivalric combat to the raw, calculated mechanics of late-period warfare. It reflects the growing understanding that war was increasingly about equipment, technique, and the ability to adapt weaponry to new forms of defense. The glorified image of the indestructible knight met its match not through magic or treachery, but through a cold, methodical tool designed to defeat them by exploiting every structural flaw in their armor. The corbin didn't need speed or elegance. It relied on controlled violence and anatomical knowledge. It was not a weapon of chaos. It was a weapon of understanding. And that's what made it one of the most unforgiving instruments of medieval brutality.